Well, looky here. It's been a hot minute. Hey, everybody. Hoping that everything's working okay. I am so sorry that we're a couple of minutes late. We were having a little bit of technical difficulties with Einar getting in here. But yeah, it's been a hot minute for everybody. How have things been going? How have you guys been doing? I see Singham in the chat. I see Kay. I see Akeda. I see Mac1701. I'm not actually sure. Are you in the server? I see Roxy. I see Terralana. It's been a hot minute. I haven't had the spoons to do a live stream in quite some time. Mostly because, well, when I moved to long form, I don't know if y'all noticed, but when I moved to long form, things got a lot more work for me, if that makes any sense. Oh, hey, Juliana. Hey, Absinthe. Circus Jinx. That's an interesting username. Hey, Mist. So, this is just going to be a laid-back type Q&A stream. Thank you so much, Akeda, as always, with the inaugural Super Chat. As per usual, Super Chats will be prioritized, though this mofo right here, Channel Sugar Daddy Akeda himself, decided to purchase every single one, except for, I think, 3, but nearly every single one of the books that I mentioned in my previous video I was saving up for, because of a positive experience that he had that is entirely up to him if he wants to share it or not. It was shared privately in a private area of the server, so I'm not going to assume that that's okay. So the majority of the expense for that series has actually been covered. So there's not a super hard press for Super Chats tonight. I was originally going to have to be like, hey, I kind of need a little bit of help because not making a video, taking 2 weeks off to kind of recover my spoons means that I'm taking a huge hit to my income because I only get paid for 2 videos per month now. So like my income got cut in half at the start of this year, and I've never made enough to support myself and my bills in the first place. I basically make just enough to support the channel. So when you're talking about that sort of thing, if I miss a video because of either an emergency or because like I just hit burnout or something, then I'm kind of under pressure to make up for it. But because Akeda helped like mitigate a lot of those expenses, things are even more chill than they otherwise would be. So this, by the way, I've been sitting here ignoring my guest, who, by the way, has really bad background noise, which is part of the reason I'm just talking to you at the moment. This is Einar. He's been a good friend of mine for a while now, actually. He's got a Heathen channel over on TikTok, and he and I met over on Twitter originally, but we started to get to know each other when I created my TikTok for, you know, doing the weekly Delphic Maxins and just kind of BSing around a little bit, you know, giving myself an alternate method to, you know, just like an alternate method for creativity, right? Like the shorter videos and stuff don't take quite as much energy to do. Oh, wow, there's 27 people, 29 people. It's good to see so many people here. It's been a hot minute. So, Einar, if you'd like to introduce yourself a little bit, feel free, because not a lot of people have actually, we haven't collaborated publicly before, but we've been friends for a while.
What's going on, everybody? I am Z-list TikToker Einar Blackheart. Hope everybody's doing good tonight.
He does a lot of live streams and stuff on TikTok. He also does a lot of really, really humorous like voice content. Also, you probably just heard the hiss of me opening my 7-Up. I've been having stomach issues since I got gluten yesterday, so apologies if my extraordinarily sensitive mic occasionally picks up me opening my overcarbonated soda. So the way that this works, for those of you who have never been to a Q&A stream before, this is the 10K Q&A, several months late. And I apologize for that. But like I said, between Mero, which, by the way, the Xenia Bridge is not gone. Mero and I are still co-hosts, but Mero had some family emergency stuff that she talked about a little bit. I'm not going to get into details because she hasn't shared a ton of it on like public areas. But she had an emergency thing that happened. One of her family members passed away, unfortunately, and she's been kind of dealing with that for a little while. So we haven't been able to do a lot of live streams because of that. I haven't had the spoons to stream by myself. So we are doing the 10K Q&A because I don't have the current situations that have been causing me to not stream, because I'm not diving deep into work to the point where I'm workaholisming myself to burnout. Midnight Mero is Nervardia, my co-host for the Xenia Bridge. Oh, it looks like Akeda decided to share the story. For those who don't know, my dad was in the hospital. We thought Tuesday was going to be it. I asked Titus and Persephone if they would take their time, and they did. That's why I'm thankful. Sarana, how do you get so good with information? Huh?
No, you're good. Sorry about that.
How do you get so good with information sharing consent? Well, I mean, with consent stuff, you just remember when somebody has told you that they don't want you to share something. Einar, if you're gonna have a lot of background noise, please do mute.
100%.
But yeah, like as far as how you get good at information sharing consent, you just try to remember when folks have said that they don't want certain things shared. Like you look at what is being publicly shared versus not. Being a public figure and having a lot of privacy concerns yourself helps. Like there are certain things that I share with my friends that I don't share publicly because there's a certain level of privacy that I like maintaining, like a certain level of distance between my professional and personal life. Tiralana, thank you so much for the $10 super chat. Doing okay mostly, just tired and getting used to less caffeine and salt, trying to get healthier. Yeah, caffeine is one of the great addictions, isn't it? Salt's the other one. Like I do not eat a lot of sweets, but I will eat all of the chips ever. Singham, you have missed nothing. Okay, so for those of you who have questions, you do not have to super chat to ask a question. And both Einar and I can answer questions that aren't specifically related to Hellenism. For those of you who are new to live streams, the one major rule about questions is, well, I guess there's technically two. If Einar and I are not comfortable answering a question, we will tell you no. Yes, Codeman, Einar's entire channel is actually related specifically to heathenry. That's pretty much all he does. That and sometimes cooking.
You can find me on TikTok at Einar of Midgard. I have the very fortunate privilege of being the only one there.
So yeah, if you guys are curious, Einar is a TikToker primarily, though he has been talking about wanting to start a YouTube channel, and when he does, I will add it to the description below. But for those of you who are curious, feel free to ask questions. The one major rule is do not ask questions about drama, like community drama. Like I'm not going to talk about community drama on a live stream ever. This is a chill space, period, end of story. 2, if you ask a personal question and Einar and I are not comfortable answering it, then we will say no. I've done that when people have asked me questions about my partner, like my partners before, either one of them. So, because they haven't consented to sharing certain kinds of information. So, apart from that, here we are. So, what would you guys like? Looks like Einar, you have a specific question for you. Saranatari says, "What does your name mean for you?" You are still muted if you're talking at me.
Okay, bloody hell. Very much like a lot of people in heathenry, I was not born in Scandinavia. I'm not Scandinavian. I had seen my entry into heathenry as sort of a baptism in faith, if that makes sense. And what I had drawn as far as a parallel is concerned, I said to myself, new chapter of my life, and it requires a new name. My full name boils down to Einar Vitraven Blackheart. I chose my first name as an homage to my favorite composer, Einar Selvik of Wardruna. And the Vitraven part is literally
Oop, you with us still? You went silent.
So that's what it boils down to for me. It's essentially, think of it as a new chapter, so to speak.
So Elithea asks you, again, a question specifically for Einar. What are your favorite topics to talk about?
Ooh.
I mean, this gives me an opportunity to poke fun at you. I mean, your favorite topic to talk to me about is drama, but...
Oh, feel bloody free to pick my brain. I am a big old history dork. World War II, that area is where I hang my hat mostly. But embracing heathenry forced me to become an even better historian than I was.
Mm-hmm.
So I've
You
turned
used to
around.
do that really wonderful podcast where you talked about all kinds of historical stuff. You sent me the one episode on World War II and specifically like the start of the concentration camps.
The Einsatz, specifically the Einsatzgruppen.
Mm-hmm.
But that particular chapter of history is, for lack of a better term, a little too dark for this live stream. So,
oh no, I was just mentioning that was something that I remembered in terms of talking about history. You and I talked about. You also have a tendency to be like. I've noticed that you have loved to talk about the ways that like our traditions are similar and different, like comparing and contrasting. Like that's one of the reasons why you and I got to know each other.
Well, syncretism's always been my thing. I very much enjoy picking up on studying the parallels between different cultures, different religious traditions and stuff like that.
Okay, so what would you say if you had to pick one topic, let's say even within heathenry, that is your favorite thing to talk about, what would it be?
Oof. What we don't know. I know that sounds a little nuts, but it would boil down to what we don't know. I've been doing quite a hefty degree of historical digging as of late, and I've upturned so many things that I have.
Oh, you cut out again. All right. Well, while we are waiting for him to reconnect, because he's walking home. Apologies, guys. He should be home fairly soon. Let me answer another question while we wait. Singham says, in your opinion, what's the best ethnic cuisine and why is it Indian food? The answer, of course, as a vegetarian is it's Indian food. And it's Indian food because they've been like working on vegetarian cuisine for hundreds of years at this point. Oh, looks like Honor reconnected. Are you back? Oh, nope. We are having technical issues. Oh, we have a mute. All right, try unmuting, Einar. See if we can get you back. There we go. We can hear you again.
Fantastic. So now where were
you were in the middle of what we don't know. I know that sounds crazy, and then nothing.
Cool. Technical difficulties abound. However, I am back.
Hey, people who are channel members, we need that burning ram sticks, y'all.
What we don't know is arguably what's started fascinating me, because at the end of the day, heathenry specifically is Germanic polytheism, whether people want to admit to that or not. And we don't know quite a lot about Germanic polytheistic traditions. And I've been delving pretty highly into that lately, and it's just been racking my brain.
All right. So I had started answering the question, what is your favorite cuisine and why is it Indian food? And the funny thing is like me, yours also is Indian food. Also, if you're trying to turn your camera on, it doesn't seem to be turning on.
No big deal. I will go audio only for the rest of the stream. That's not a problem.
You might have to go in and enable the permissions to let it use your camera. You also muted again.
Totally not my fault, I promise. Fat thumbs.
So, as far as Indian food goes, I know that you actually, like me, share a passion for Indian food for a slightly similar and also different reason. You love the complexity of cooking, from what I remember, because like I started sending you pictures of Indian food and you geeked out with me. That was fun.
I'll be honest with you, I have not fangirled that hard over food in quite some time.
It was fun to do together, to be honest. So for those of you who don't know, I've been a vegetarian for over a decade, and Einar's been exploring vegetarianism. And Indian cuisine is just absolutely fascinating when it comes to just the layers and complexity of cooking techniques, and specifically the way that Indians, like across the entirety of India, have learned to manipulate beans and vegetables and like spices and layering of cooking and all of that to bring out some of the most complex and layered flavors I've ever had.
See, for me, it hit me with. I essentially view the lens of cooking in the same manner that Anthony Bourdain did. May that man forever rest in peace. But I viewed Indian food as legitimately one of the single most exciting cuisines I have ever had the opportunity to delve into.
Thank you so much for the super sticker, Elithia. Unfortunately, my program doesn't let me show it off, but it says you are amazing in the actual live chat. Thank you so much.
Yes, she is, Elithia. Absolutely. Whew. You're awesome.
So like you were saying about Indian food.
Indian food proved to me that it is so richly complex. It is so well seasoned, well thought out, well put together. And depending on the region of India you go, in the region of India you're studying and cooking from, it is also this delicious culture of turning around and making something out of nothing. Very little ingredients, but super simplistic, super big flavors. And I make the joke where, as a chef, if I had to choose any place to culinarily go to die, it would be India.
Well, and the thing is, for me, it's actually, I find that it's not like all that simple for flavors. They've mastered the art of mise en place, and they've mastered the art of layered cooking and cooking timing. Like, for example, tempering is such a brilliant method. For those of you who don't know, tempering is when at the very, very end of a dish, just before you serve it, you saute spices and oil to make the oil aromatic and then pour it over or stir it into whatever you're about to serve. And that completely changes the nature of the way that those spices influence a dish versus if you added them at the beginning, especially for things like stews and dals.
So if I could interject for a moment, Sarana just asked a very interesting question. And
well, we do need to try to go in as much order as we can.
Well, this question did tend to fall back a ways, so I do want to make sure it's covered.
Okay.
Sarana asks, is Mercury in retrograde right now? LOL. Darker question if it's not too personal. How did you avoid the heathenry alt-right pipeline? That is the question of the century as far as I am concerned. I am a student of history, first and foremost. I also have the unique experience, and I think I am one of 3 in my own heathen circle that are deconverted Jews. I had family who was in Birkenau during the war, and I've turned around and seen videos about the AFA, groups that pervert heathen symbols and pervert the culture of my spiritual forebears. And I'm just like, this is not for me. This is not what I want. And before I truly chose to walk and embrace this path, I wanted to make sure that should I have ever gotten involved and in line with a group, I wanted to make sure those groups weren't big fans of a certain German political party in the 40s.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I sent you something in the chat, by the way, just as a quick coverage. So would you say, because I remember you mentioned when you and I first got to know each other that you were kind of in a very different place when you first started, like in terms of both your politics and kind of your worldview. So do you want to talk a little bit about that, like how those things sort of started to change?
Oof. Okay. When I was in high school and when I was in junior high school, I was exposed to anti-Semitism by people who had no idea what anti-Semitism was. And these people, flat out up and admitted I was physically assaulted for being Jewish. I had a swastika sprayed on one of my backpacks. I had racial obscenity spray painted on one of my lockers. And I fell out of faith with Judaism, and I started to walk and explore. I still held very much universalist and humanist beliefs, because one of the first books that I ever wound up picking up was William Blake's The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. And one quote from that book basically hit me, and the quote stated that as the caterpillar chooses to place her eggs on the fairest of leaves, so too does the priest choose to place his curse upon the fairest of joys. I eventually found LaVeyan Satanism because those humanist beliefs fell in line with my own, and I fell out of favor with that, and I found the call to heathenry quite some time ago, and I've been here ever since. And I can safely say that I don't know where my life would be had I not embraced it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So we have a few more questions that actually came before the one that you had answered, so I want to make sure that we don't miss any of them.
Hands down.
Okay, so we have let's see, we had the what was your first experience with the gods? Codeman 7780 says, and who was it with? Now, I've told my story several times, and there are previous live streams where I've answered that question that you guys can go find, so I'm going to let Einar take this one as well.
My first experience with the gods was an incredibly intense UPG-fueled interaction with Odin. In my parents' neighborhood, there was an apartment building that was undergoing roof renovations. And as it was undergoing these renovations, I was walking under the scaffold. Something fell and hit it. Crows just dropped from the scaffold, and instead of flying in all directions, they flew straight at me. And if you're across the street, you're obviously seeing something really funny, because I'm just flailing my arms around, screaming, get them off me, get them off me. But the minute the crows parted ways, an old man was standing in front of me. This old man had a cataract in his left eye, and he just looked like the sweetest old man you could ever meet in your life. Looked like everyone's stereotypical grandpa. And he just looked at me, and I felt nothing but raw power radiating off of him. And he just looked at me and said, "Don't be afraid." I said that I wasn't, and by the time I realized that I said I wasn't, I had walked about 50 feet out from under that scaffold, and there was no trace of the crows, no trace of the old man. I ran headlong into Odin, as far as I'm concerned, and that was what solidified my entry into the faith.
Yeah, that sounds like a really intense experience. It's kind of similar to the vision that I had of Athena, though with her, it was less that I physically saw her and that she spoke with me, and more of a vision in which, like, her presence was holy terror is the best way to describe what that was like.
Yeah, I could say the same for mine.
Like, it's awe and it's love, but it is also absolute pants-shitting fear.
Yes.
So we have another question specifically for you. Do you draw mostly from Scandinavian heathenry, continental, far western, or do you draw from a mix?
I am, by and large, I am 100% a Scandinavian heathen. I venerate Heimdall, Hel, and Freyr. Those are who have been with me the longest. Those are who I've learned from the most. I very much understand, respect, and appreciate deities from other pantheons. It's just I've never really felt the call to multi-traditionalism.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, I'm kind of similar. I do practice multi-traditionalism. I practice some things from, like, my ancestral tradition, but primarily I'm an Athenian recon, as you know.
Right.
Singham says, do you see any parallels between heathenry and Hinduism?
Oof. Okay. One, actually, I do. I mean, with what little interaction with Hinduism in a spiritual sense that I've seen, one of the biggest things that I've come to absolutely respect the hell out of in Hinduism is ancestor veneration. I'm currently working on putting together an altar towards my own spiritual ancestors. I'm very firmly of the belief that if you know about your history and your history ain't exactly what you would feel is worth venerating, there are people in our stories, people in our sagas who resonate with you. Those people, as far as I'm concerned, can become your spiritual ancestor, and you venerate that lesson learned and you venerate that ancestor.
Well, I mean, within Hellenism, that would be hero cult, because hero cult is cult of the dead for people you're not physically related to.
Yeah.
Unless you're adopted, because in ancient Greece, they thought that adoption literally changed your blood.
Adoption in heathenry, or adoption in heathen era Scandinavia was, it didn't matter who you were. If you were Olaf Bjornsson and the person who adopted you was a Sigurdsson, you were Sigurdsson until the day you died. Your former familial identity ceased to exist.
Well, yeah, and it was the same way in ancient Athens. Like, adoption was a ritual that was done before the gods that was said to change your entire bloodline. If the bloodline that was adopting you happened to, say, have roots in, like, hero cult, you would have been trained within that hero cult, and you could perform those rites if you were, like, of the appropriate other qualifications for that.
Right.
So somebody it looks like Kay asks, why would people not want to admit to heathenry being Germanic polytheism? Isn't that kind of the definition?
It is 100% the definition. There are, unfortunately, at least on my side of it, there are a lot of people who don't have a full grasp on. People grasp the spiritual and the religious and the ritualistic side of heathenry, and history unfortunately falls to the wayside for a lot of people on my side of things. And that's one of the responsibilities I've given myself, is to introduce more of the history of how our spiritual forebears came up, how our spiritual forebears lived and practiced, versus the lore about our gods and all of the spiritual side of things. Because at the end of the day, with heathenry, very much like Hellenism, history plays a large sum total part into completely giving you a bigger picture than if you just focused on the spiritual side of it.
Well, I mean, like, the myths are informed by history. Myths are in a perpetual, like, conversation with the culture that birthed them. And understanding how that conversation takes place is a lot of the job of both the historian, but also the content creator and reconstructionist, if that's the methodology that you approach paganism with.
Right.
I got an interesting question here from Zipic here. Do you ever plan on covering spin-offs of Greek polytheism like Orphism or Julian Hellenism? I am not a fan of Julian Hellenism. I have talked about this in the past. Apologies if any of my fans happen to be Julian Hellenists. I've talked about the reasons that I have issues with Julian Hellenism. I do not plan on covering it. A lot of early Hellenist videos that I had that are like, let's talk about the community, had a lot to do with problems from Julian Hellenists. That isn't to say that all Julian Hellenists are bad. It's just that there is a particular toxic subset of that community that tends to be very difficult to deal with, that I ran into very early on in my journey, that nearly deterred me from the path. If my experience with Athena hadn't been as intense as it was, it might have. As for Orphism is a little bit more complicated because there's a lot of mixed evidence as to whether or not it was even all one tradition, or rather if Orpheus was a authorial name that we even have, like Plato and Aristotle making comments like the so-called Orphics. It's very clear that most of those texts were written in later antiquity, and they were not all part of one tradition. Orpheus was a sort of pseudonym that a lot of authors would take when they wrote mythological or poetic texts or hymns that had a sort of theological underbelly to them that differed in a lot of ways. Orpheus was also given credit in later antiquity for things like the Eleusinian mysteries and mystery cults. So the problem is there isn't really one Orphism, and the more I've dug into it, the more that's kind of become obvious. But trying to talk about all of the different theories as to how these hymns in particular, because that's the majority of the evidence we have, interacted with each other has proven extremely difficult. There are so many different varying scholarly theories around that I'm not even sure if I'd be the right person to tackle it. So maybe in the future on Orphism, but in terms of like just the complexity of it, it's difficult. Kay asks, would the AFA's use of symbols qualify as cultural appropriation?
I'm going to flat out say no, because as far as I am concerned, there is a difference between cultural appropriation versus cultural bastardization and perversion.
Well, cultural appropriation does harm generally to a vulnerable base culture that is essential to the identity of a group of people, versus like perversion of, say, religious symbols or terminology. If they don't belong to a minority culture that is currently being abused in some way, it's less likely that the perversion of those symbols is going to negatively affect everybody else at all times. Would you say that that's kind of what you're getting at?
That is what I'm getting at. See, the AFA, because I made it a priority to study these people. The AFA, unfortunately, very much structures their organization like the Christian church. I mean, yes, there is an Alsheriar Gothi, there are Gothis and Githyas, but at the end of the day, their entire pile of holidays and bloats are incredibly, incredibly Christian influenced. For example, they have a holiday called the Feast of the Einherjar, and it is essentially a festival, a Christian festival to St. Michael under the guise of heathenry. The AFA, as far as I am concerned with them, while they are a very problematic entity and a very problematic group of people, I sincerely am of the belief that, for lack of a better term, they don't know their ass from their elbow when it comes down to what they're doing, because at the end of the day, Stephen McNallen did start off with decent intentions, and then when he turned around and started, and when he released,
is there any proof that he ever started out with decent intentions?
He initially left the original AFA, because heathenry started in this country with two groups: the Asatru Alliance under Elsie Christensen, and then the original AFA, or the Asatru Free Assembly, under, if I'm not mistaken, Valgard Murray. Valgard Murray left, McNallen left, and wanted to branch off and do his own thing. And he first started off as this guy who wanted to bring heathenry together regardless of race, regardless of skin color. And then in, I want to say, 1975, he took the 9 noble virtues that were written by the Odinic rite, just called them some Odinist statements, and just basically changed some words around. I mean, the one phrase from Stephen McNallen that made me go, absolutely not, hell no, to hell with this guy, was ancestry is better than universalism. That is the most untrue thing I have ever heard anybody say.
I'm not entirely sure if he ever wanted to unite heathenry regardless of race, because very early writings of his talked about a sort of like spiritual DNA and like race souls and things of that nature. Like, he was the one who popularized a lot of those things, and he got a lot of those arguments from a far-right thinker and philosopher who is actually kind of a darling of the far right generally. I've sent you a few of the books for that, because I was able to get them for free from Amazon, because Kindle Unlimited, you get paid per page view, and There are definitely a few things that you really shouldn't do that Caliber is capable of, and thereby that kind of robs the author of those profits.
Right.
But McNallen had a lot. He was very good at dog whistling, but I would never say that he wanted to unite heathenry regardless of race. I think that what he wanted to do was subvert a lot of the racism to make it more palatable to the masses. And when he ended up getting ousted from the AFA, that kind of like tore the veneer off. But even some of his earliest writings have very racist undertones.
Which is where I would then turn around and have to highlight the mentor of my mentor.
Alain de Benoit, by the way, for those of you who are curious about who I was talking about, McNallen echoed a lot of his arguments from a very, very early time.
See, and like I said, as far as I'm concerned, because Valgard Murray and Elsie Christensen, they dropped off. There aren't very many people who talk about them to this day, and that is with good reason. Very much like the majority of truly hateful people, they should disappear with the sands of time. But the mentor of my mentor was a man by the name of Alex Jerome. And Alex Jerome took the heathen name Gamlingen, which literally just translates to the old man. He built the first non-AFA aligned Hof in Arizona, and would invite kindreds from across the country that were not AFA aligned to hold bloat and hold ceremony. And after they left, he would get their addresses and start forwarding newsletters that were keeping heathens in communication.
Yeah, you told me about this.
And Gamlingen is so undercovered, underspoken, and just unknown that the only time I have ever heard Gamlingen's name brought up was in the book Practical Ossetru by Diana Paxson, and that's it.
So we have another question. People have different ways of viewing the pantheons of the gods. Do either of you know of any particular views of the gods and their nature that you personally think are quite misguided? Oh boy. Don't offer blood to the Theoi, specifically human blood. Just don't do that. End statement. I'm making an entire series about why that's a bad idea. You got any thoughts, Einar?
Oh, very much so. From the heathen standpoint, there is a heathen sect. There is a sect of heathenry called Rokatru. Rokatru ignores the traditional heathen groups of the Asir and the Vanir for the Rok, the beings involved in Ragnarok. They view Loki as the prime deity of their school of thought. Jormungandr, Fenrir, Hel, and all the bad guys, because these people sincerely believe that Ragnarok has to happen. Not because...
Okay, so keep in mind, these are not talking about people who just honor these deities in their practice as a part of their practice because of personal experiences or things like that. This is a sect that specifically only focuses on them.
Precisely. This particular sect of heathenry,
with the stated goal to bring about Ragnarok, is that correct?
Correct. This particular sect of heathenry is legitimately a form of theistic Satanism under the guise of heathenry.
Well, that's really interesting. If anybody here is familiar with them and would like to correct anything we're saying, I don't know all that much about them. I've heard things from Einar, and I've heard a few things from like other heathen friends, but that is not my particular cup of tea. I'm just saying don't offer human blood to the Theoi, because there's lots and lots of reasons why you shouldn't. And most of them have to do with hubris and the horrible, horrible agos that can be inflicted from that. So, on the next topic, many of us deal with traditions where most of the beginner resources are done by far-right movements like folkists and songis. How do we deal with that? The answer is we collectively, as communities that are on the more positive side of things, we need more voices, not just as content creators, but also within sub-communities like, say, the Xenia Bridge or like Einar's server or sub-communities on places like TikTok or even in forums to be like to take some responsibility for creating more educational resources, whether that's just a post sort of linking the better ones, or whether that's like taking on the mantle of being a content creator. We need more positive voices that are willing to speak up and over those folks who are attempting to suck you down into the far right. We also need more people who are willing to cover the sneaky ways in which those arguments can get you, and also why they're wrong. For example, my whole video on folkism talks about the sneaky ways that the YSCE likes to argue.
From the heathen standpoint specifically,
well, from your standpoint as a heathen, I suppose.
Well, yeah, I'll rephrase that. From my standpoint as a heathen, we have the AFA, who is going to be the persistent thorn in the paw of every person to walk the path I walk. You have, unfortunately, neo-Nazis who pervert our symbols, pervert our spiritual tradition because they think it's the right idea. And I'm very much of the belief that universalism is the only way forward. I believe that interfaith allyship.
So for folks who are curious, universalism is often pitted as the reverse of folkism, which is the belief that anybody can come to the gods regardless of ancestry, perceived or actual.
Yes. And I'm very firmly of the belief to combat racism, to combat hate, you do have to understand it. There are people who, on my platform specifically, who sincerely believe in having a banned authors list. And when I question these people, I said, well, why do you think that should be a banned author? Well, they're hateful. How are they hateful? Why are they hateful? I don't know. I was just told they should be banned. The one thing that needs
well, that's why the community black and gray list that we have has the reasoning for each and every one of the authors. And it's not a community blacklist in the sense that it's like, do not buy from these authors. It's you should know what this author has done or what ideas they put forward before deciding to support them.
Exactly. First and foremost, dealing with those people, education has to be first and foremost a person's number one priority when combating and understanding these hate groups and these racists. That's priority number one. Priority number two is if you see someone who is expressing this behavior, being able to confront them, hear their story, and if you could potentially educate them on why their behavior is incorrect, and you can make them see that their racist, folkist beliefs are incorrect, and you could bring someone into the right side of thinking, that is a fantastic feather to put in your cap. Not saying that you should run around saying that you've re-educated racists or anything like that, but if you have the opportunity to do that, and you have the opportunity to make someone say, oh my gods, I learned this faith entirely wrong. Thank you for educating me. That is an absolute win. I had someone on my platform who was the exact same way, myself and a few other people. We sat him down, we spoke to him, we heard his story, and we got it out of him as to what was going on, and we chose to mentor him. And he changed his life for the better. I mean, the Havamal teaches that no man is beyond reproach. And I hold very, very much to that belief. If you're capable of educating someone and that person in turn educates someone else, that's a win as far as I'm concerned.
So we got a quick $10 super chat. Thank you so much, Tiralana. So we're going to jump down really quick to that because I said I would prioritize them. What is the worst adaptation of a myth you've ever seen? I mean, like belligerently bad. Oh, this is gonna hurt a lot of people in their soul. But to be honest, I don't even know if you could call Percy Jackson an adaptation, but the way that Percy Jackson specifically has portrayed a lot of myths was just the portrayals of certain gods were not great. I'm not the biggest fan of that. There are a few different portrayals of the Persephone myth. Lore Olympus, again, a lot of people are going to groan and get mad at me for this, but Lore Olympus is one of the worst retellings I've ever seen of the Homeric hymn to Demeter. It's very much its own creative work, but it just... Anybody who's read it, if I say the word Apollon, you should probably know what I'm talking about, and I'll just leave it there. I am not a fan. Like, the art is pretty, and, like, the story is interesting, but it's just... it's not a good representation of the myth at all.
My gamers out there are probably going to hate my guts when I say this, but I am fully braced for all the flack I might potentially catch. The 2018 iteration of God of War was the most atrocious mythological retelling, and I'm not saying that because Kratos
is God of War actually trying to retell any myths, though, or is it just like its own story, kind of the way Percy Jackson is?
It is to a point kind of its own story. They used, for example, there was a story that Odin imprisoned Mimir in a tree, and Mimir and Odin spoke to the severed head of Mimir that he reanimated through magic. When in reality, after the Aesir-Vanir war, the head of Mimir was returned to Odin, and Odin just reanimated it and talked to the head. But the whole thing is, and I also looked because there was no actual consultants as far as Norse mythology were concerned within the faith. There was no consulting on anything for the first God of War, and unfortunately, it's carried through to the next game that's coming out.
I mean, the God of War kind of did not portray the Greek pantheon very well. But like I said, when I initially thought Percy Jackson, they specifically asked about retellings, and there's a difference between a retelling and just a bad portrayal. So I was trying to go for, well, Lore Olympus is supposed to be a retelling, a modernized sort of retelling of the Homeric hymn to Demeter, and it's not at all. Like, it takes a lot of liberties in directions that I don't think are the best.
Well, see, I had to take the question into a bit of a different direction because a lot of my exposure to Norse mythology through media has been rather faithful retellings of things. I mean, the accounts of Ibn Fadlan was the basis of the movie The 13th Warrior with Antonio Banderas. A lot of what we see in Lord of the Rings, a lot of what we see in Tolkien is based in Norse mythology, and it's very respectful to how it's told. But as far as God of War is concerned, God of War was just a steaming train wreck of mythological hodgepodge, and it was just not cool.
All right, so continuing on the questions that we had before, have you found as you've come into Hellenism and worship Athena, having visions or communicating with the gods is less terrifying? No, not really. So communicating with the gods is very different than a vision or an appearance in a dream. The gods are still terrifying every time they show up, not because, oh God, I don't know what's going on, but just because that is their nature. They provoke awe, and awe is intrinsically intermixed with terror. But I would say that the communication has gotten subtler over time as I've gotten more experienced in my practice, rather than needing to be as upfront as a vision. So I would say that it has not gotten less terrifying. I would say the sort of terrifying things that would need to sort of shake me out of my, like, stability, as it were, have become less frequent. That there are more subtle ways that the gods communicate. Rosanna asks, what offerings does Hell prefer? That is an Einar question. I have no idea.
Okay. As for heathens, Hell is very much a neo-pagan deity that is worshipped. Hell is, for me, Hell is my matron. And my specific offerings are pretty much for what I can get my hands on. If I can leave bones on my altar and offering to her, I will. But one of the biggest offerings I have for her is ash. And I've felt a lot of great responses to that fact. I mean, if you're burning incense every time you're in ritual, save your ashes, use them as an offering, and I've found her to be very responsive to that.
All right, so we have another one that is for you, it looks like, Einar. If it's not too personal, can you talk about the things you've learned from Freya, Hel, and others you've been in contact with?
Ooh, that's a good one.
And you immediately muted yourself. Can we get an F in the chat, both for that hiss of me opening up my overcarbonated soda and for Einar's fat thumbs?
Indeed. For me, the biggest and the hardest lessons I've learned had to have been from Odin. Odin is a god of wisdom, a god of war, poetry, and death.
Wisdom cannot be spoken, it can only be taught the hard way.
And I can tell you I'll be frank with you, I don't have enough hands for the amount of times that one-eyed man has knocked me flat on my ass spiritually. But the fact of the matter is, Odin is the type of deity that will go quiet for a very long time, and you'll feel these little nuggets, these kernels that lead you towards where you want to be. And when the big picture finally comes around and whacks you over the head with a cast iron pan, you're like, oh, why didn't I see that before? But Odin's always taught me specifically, live your life to the fullest, regardless of what the universe has thrown at you.
We've got a really interesting question here from Akeda. I've been seeking the Mesopotamian deities, but I've also given thanks to some Hellenic gods for obvious reasons. Should I keep them separate? Do some gods want to be mixed in the same ceremony? So this is a syncretism question, and the answer is complicated. It's complicated. That's the answer to everything pagan all the time, but the answer here is there are different approaches to this. There's the multi-traditionalist approach, which is typically taken by people who worship many deities across different pantheons, which means that you honor, say, if you want to embrace both, you'd honor the Hellenic deities in the Hellenic way and the Sumerian deities in the Sumerian way. Typically, the other form of syncretism is where you have one dominant tradition you practice primarily. So you would pick either Sumerian recon or Hellenist recon, and you would honor the deities of the other pantheon in the dominant pantheon's way. So in this case, like, let's say Einar decided that he wanted to honor Tyche in a ceremony. Einar, because he's primarily a heathen, could choose, if he wanted to, as a syncretist, to honor Tyche in the heathen way. And so long as he's not doing something that's straight up anathema to a deity, like, cutting his hand open and trying to offer human blood, there's no reason to believe that the gods would have a problem with that, because traditionally in ancient times, that's actually how a lot of syncretism happened. And that's actually how you get a lot of very interesting mixed practices like Greco-Buddhism.
Wait, what?
Yeah, Greco-Buddhism's a whole thing. Look up Bactria. Fascinating. There are a few monographs on it.
You've given me something to look into. Thank you for that.
Yep, in Bactria, Heracles was considered a guardian of the Buddha.
Whoa.
Yeah, Greco-Buddhism's a whole thing. There's not a ton of information on Bactria, but there was tons and tons of Indo-Greek syncretism in that area.
Right.
So the answer is, the ancients did all kinds of syncretism, all kinds of different ways. Mixing and matching like traditional cultural things with things that you pick up is as old as history. That's actually, the entire Hellenistic era is a gigantic bottle of syncretism. So the answer is, listen to the gods. If the gods want to be honored alongside each other, if they seem to respond positively to that, do that. If you feel called one way or another, do that. the gods are not static concepts that exist floating in books and history. You don't have like a teacher sitting over your shoulder judging whether you're performing your rituals in the most historic method possible. The gods are living, breathing beings, and for the majority of us at least, most of us feel like we were called by them in some way or another. Like, paganism is one of those things that the vast majority of us seem to kind of spring from the earth, as it were, because of the fact that we get called. The gods never died. So what the gods do in response to the things you do should be your guide more than the opinion of any content creator. We can present what's historical to give you a very firm foundation for building your own practice, but ultimately, your goddess, your relationship with the gods, is yours, not mine. So if you feel drawn to one particular pantheon but hear a call from another, it's between you and your gods how you decide to honor that call, if you do at all. That's my opinion on it. Einar, what's yours?
Because, as I said, I've looked into other gods. I've studied other gods. Studying religious traditions is something I'm very interested in. It's never something that I've felt a pull to go towards other pantheons. So, as far as my experience is concerned, genuinely, I would say if you feel a call to a deity outside of your practice, research the hell out of that deity. And if you sincerely feel establishing a reciprocity with that deity and establishing a relationship, do it. If you feel you will come away richer for the experience, do it. That's what this spiritual path is for all of us. It's a process of enrichment. It's a process of growth. If there is something you see that could be worth it to you spiritually, go for it. I sincerely believe that what is legitimately the worst that could happen? You leave an offering to that deity and the deity doesn't accept it. That legitimately would be the worst thing that could potentially happen, because at the end of the day, the gods of your pantheon, the gods you walked with and worshipped and worked alongside of, are still going to embrace you regardless.
Well, except for don't offer human blood to the Theoi. Just don't do that. If you're talking about the Greek gods, just don't do that particular thing. That thing is very well attested as to why you don't do it.
Fair.
I've got 3 more fucking videos about why you don't do that. There are entire mythic sagas that I've already spent 40 minutes covering that I spent significantly longer than that researching and pulling my hair out, and you got lots of messages during that time, so you can attest to this. Don't do that. Like, it seems like the gods are telling you to do that, just don't do that. Roxy, $5 super chat, thank you so much, says, do you have a favorite single representation or depiction of a deity from mainstream media or pop culture? All of the deity depictions in Hades, the game Hades, just, oh my god, that art style is stunning, and it has enabled a certain level of creativity among, like, sacred artists on places like Pinterest and Instagram and, like, DeviantArt. It has just inspired so much exploration. Just absolutely stunning. That art style is gorgeous. I love it.
For me, I would have to say, without a doubt, Ian McShay playing Mr. Wednesday, who was eventually revealed to be Odin in American Gods.
American Gods is a damn good book. That's such a good book.
One of my favorites.
I mean, Neil Gaiman is just fantastic.
Absolutely. I mean, the Sandman is the reason I got into comic books. So.
Okay, so Singham says, in the unlikely event of me including a non-Hindu gods in my practice, how would I deal with the fact that most other traditions don't like consuming food offerings? I mean, I think this kind of like comes into the dovetailing with syncretism. It's between you and the gods. If the gods respond negatively to you eating the food offerings that you're offering to them, then at that point, you know not to consume food offerings you give to those particular gods. Like, at that point, you'd want to burn them or bury them or wrap them up for your trash or, like, pour them down the sink or insert disposal yeeting method here. There's my video on what to offer to the gods and the video on how to offer to the gods both cover disposal. But like, it's really between you and the gods. And there are divination methods that you can use to help figure out if an offering wasn't accepted because of either consumption or something else. But generally, the gods are pretty communicative. It's just about learning how to listen to them. What would your advice be, Einar?
From the heathen standpoint, I would research offering methodologies if you were to incorporate a heathen god into your practice. For example, your easiest bet legitimately would be Odin. Because in heathenry, it's taught that Odin doesn't consume food. The only thing he consumes is mead. So, legitimately, solely libational offerings for Odin. There would be no issue with food consumption when it came down to the Allfather. But by and large, look at the deities that you feel are potentially calling to you. I would say develop your understanding of them, because there are certain deities from the heathen spectrum that genuinely you can get away with not giving offerings of food. Freya, for example, if you have...
I mean, the majority of offerings to the Mosai were performances.
Right. I mean, for example, Freya, if you have depictions of cats on your altar, you're honoring her mount. If you have goats on your altar, you're honoring Thor. There's so many ways from a heathen standpoint that you can get away with not giving food offerings that you would be 100% okay within your practice of origin were you to adopt them.
Well, this particular branch of Hinduism doesn't allow for alcohol. However, incense offerings are extremely common in Hellenism. So if you're talking about a Hellenist god, then what you're talking about there is find things like frankincense resin, burn incense. But also, my advice to folks who are talking about syncretism is either divine before you try it, or try it and see how the gods respond. Legitimately, these are living beings. I cannot tell you how a god is going to respond because I am not that god. But you can figure out how they respond by either trying it or asking them how they'd respond, which is what divination ultimately is.
I'm very firmly in the try it and see what happens camp.
Or if you're worried about it, you can also divine instead.
Agreed. I'm very much a spiritual throw caution to the wind kind of guy when it comes to experimenting with different offerings for different deities.
I'm a little more conservative on that end as far as like my trying out different offerings and things, but that's also because I happen to have the space and the, I guess, property, as it were, to be able to do a lot of traditional things like burning my first fruits to Demeter or burning massive amounts of incense or things of that nature.
Right. I very much also preach caution in that lack of caution as well. I mean,
and by the way, referring to myself as conservative there, do not put that out of context. I am about as anarchist, leftist, commie as you could possibly get. And if that offends you, well, then I don't know what you're doing here.
Oh, Gaius, that is an absolute fantastic title for me. Einar the fuck around and find out. You just put a big old smile on my face.
Gaius is the head admin of my Discord server, which, by the way, for those of you who are hanging out, link is in the description to the Discord server if you'd like to hang out in here. Einar's also in it, though he's not as active as he should be, despite being a member of the Alliance. We've got a question that I can't feel confident to answer, and I'm not sure if you would either. Would using red brick dust in Egyptian paganism be cultural appropriation? You'd have to ask a practitioner of Voodoo for that. I am not, so I'm not confident making a ruling on it.
That is not something I can give a good piece of advice on either, legitimately.
So we have, are there any good or accurate books on the history of the modern heathen movement? That's an Einar question.
That is very much an Einar question. What I would say, if you can find it, because this book is so hard to find, but if you can find it, it is well worth the read. I had to track down the author's wife just to get a copy. There is a book entitled The Orthosophen of Gamlingen, The Words of the Old Man. Gamlingen, if you've been in the stream long enough, was my mentor's mentor. And Gamlingen basically wrote his own sort of iteration of the Havamal and his own iteration of the Poetic Edda, and through that you get an incredible grasp of what early heathenry was in this country. But outside of that one particular book, there is a myriad of YouTube sources you can look up to understand the early history of heathenry within America.
So we have an interesting question here, and unfortunately, I have a very generic and quick answer to it. From No Dancing Palm Trees, do you think that the YouTube community, the pagan YouTube community, would benefit from older, more experienced practitioners? And they defined this later as being 25 plus years. And my answer to that is the pagan tube community would benefit from having more voices generally outside of just the Wicca and occultism sphere, because there's just not a lot of content creators like on YouTube that are covering any level of like historical grounding. There's a lot of eclecticism. There's a lot of like Wicca and witchcraft tradition type stuff. There's a lot of occultism, but we don't have a lot of voices in any of the recon or revivalist movements that have any level of historical grounding. So I think we just need more voices generally. Like, that's my answer to that question. Also, I'm not sure how many Hellenists there would be that have 25 plus years. I mean, heathens maybe, but like the Hellenist movement is comparatively younger than the heathen movement.
I would say that would be the case, but I would also turn around and say the same exact thing as Ally just said. Heathenry, specifically on YouTube, does need more voices. As far as I'm concerned, the more education, the better. Old heads do make education a lot easier, because not only do you get a grasp of how it was taught back in the day, because that's how I was brought up. My mentor brought me up the same way his mentor brought him up. And while I would say we do need more voices, I would also say those voices would have to be sussed out a bit to a degree, because there are certain groups who like teaching things a certain way, whereas you have the mentor to student relationships that have formed in my circle. The way that teaching is taught, I think, is something that bears repeating.
100%. And I think that all traditions benefit from experienced members, but I think that years don't necessarily translate to experience. I think that a lot of experience comes down to both education and actual like piety and experience, as in the physical act of doing it. Because somebody can be calling themselves a heathen for 20 plus years, but only have participated in maybe 2 or 3 bloats, right? Like, there are Christians that have been Christians their entire lives and have never really picked up their Bibles. So I think that what we need is more experienced people who are educated and who are good at teaching, but we also need more leadership, because a good teacher does not necessarily make a good leader or a good organizer. And I think that we need all of those things if we want any of the like pagan movements to thrive.
Right. See, the very big problem that heathenry in America faces is a disturbingly large lack of organization. And I could probably say the same thing can probably be said of Hellenism, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few organizations, but like a couple of them are focused. Some of them are only really servicing in Greece and in Greek. And then like the ones that exist, there's a few promising new ones that I've been keeping my eye on, but the oldest ones that exist in like the so-called Western world tend to be very fractured or fragmented, or tend to be kind of, I'm not going to speak ill of one of the former orgs that I used to be a part of, but they're kind of stuck in a little bit of a boomer mindset, if that makes sense, like not really updating with the technology rapidly enough to reach people.
It does. That makes a lot of sense.
Like, some of them have really brilliant organizational structures. Hellenian, for example, has like this idea of these sort of proto-demoi where people can meet in person in various like regions. But the problem with Hellenian is, again, they're one of the ones that I'm mentioning that's kind of in the boomer mindset a little bit, where they only recently got a Discord server set up. Their attempts to train priests, they've been around for over 15 years, and yet they've only, I think, trained one priest. Because of how complicated their priestly training program is, their exegete program is just as complicated. So, like, as much as they're trying to ensure quality, it gets to the point where so much stuff gets stuck in the slow mechanisms of the nonprofit that it just kind of gets suspended, where a lot of good can be done by moving to places like YouTube, or, you know, having created a Discord server much sooner, or having more of a social media presence.
Right. I mean, and the other problem from the heathen spectrum is those of us who are not aligned with folkists and hate groups do have to work to come out from under the very large shadow that they cast.
I mean, y'all also have a major cult of personality problem. Like, that has decimated several, like, heathen orgs.
See, the major heathen organizations right now are all in Scandinavia.
Well, I mean, with the exception of the Troth, but I mean, the Troth has also kind of had some messy stuff with infighting, hasn't it?
I will be straight with you. I am not a fan of the Troth.
I don't really know much about them, apart from the fact that they ostensibly are not folkist.
They're not folkists. However, I am not particularly happy with the fact that they were founded by cast-offs from the AFA, number one. Number two, the Troth has been around since, I want to say, the early 80s. And in my digging about the Troth, the first time they've ever taken action against someone for racist and intolerant behavior was about 2 weeks ago.
Jeez.
Then you have groups like Awaken the North. Awaken the North is a good organization, but the fact of the matter is their leadership changes hands so many times, it grants the impression that the org is on the verge of collapse. So specifically, Heathenry in America is very cult of personality, is very big on the cult of personality concept, which is something I'm personally not particularly big on.
Well, I mean, there's also a number of orgs that, for lack of a better way to put it, they incorporate certain less than savory aspects of, like, Norse culture that really should be left behind.
And I very much agree with that.
I don't want to get into specifics because I only know snippets from talking with friends. This is not my particular place, but I know that I've heard of some orgs that incorporate things like, well, slavery, for lack of a better way to put it. Or at least a modified version of that.
I haven't heard much. There's only one community leader. You say that in quotation marks.
I was specifically talking about things like thraldom.
Oh, I'm aware. There's only specifically one quote-unquote community leader who has had those charges laid against him, but I will not be bringing him up here. But you have in Iceland the Asatruarfélagið, and it is because of the AFA they are a closed practice. They came here in the 90s, saw that Stephen McNallen was full of it, saw that the AFA was full of it, to the point where Stephen McNallen demanded the Icelanders swear fealty to American heathens. They laughed in his face and were on the plane the next day.
So Rosanna gave a £450 donation, so thank you so much. Would sacrificing a portion of one's hair in thanks be more akin to a bloodied bandage acceptable, or a human sacrifice blood unacceptable? Actually, locks of hair were very common offerings at tomb sites to the ancestors and to the chthonic deities. So a lock of human hair would be more akin to the bandage than it would be to the blood. However, again, that is specifically in the context of chthonic deities. I cannot answer whether that would be the case for Aaronic deities because I have not read anything on that topic, but it has been brought up many times and even has actually been depicted, for example, in the Oresteia from Aeschylus. In one of the scenes where he is talking to Electra, he has just left a lock of his hair at the tomb of Agamemnon, his father. So, like in that example, that lock of hair, those things are frequently given as offerings to the dead. It also talks about how, in many, many different books, particularly Greek Way of Death, they talk about how tearing out hair or cutting off locks of hair for offerings for the deceased were considered a part of mourning. So, for some reason, the question didn't show up on my side on my little doohickey here, but I did see it over in my extra window that I have open. So, coming back to, I guess, the questions that we were going through, question about incense. The boiling down of this question states, I have some Ethiopian frankincense Athenite style from the monastery of the Russian Orthodox Church. Does it matter where it comes from? Unless that incense, you know, for a fact has been consecrated to another god, I don't think it really matters. I tend to prefer to try to support like local pagan shops and stuff when I can find them. But like if you have it from somewhere and you know for a fact it hasn't been consecrated to another god, then I don't see why you wouldn't be able to offer it. And Singam, yes, recitations of certain texts could count as an offering to the Messiah. So let's see. Roxy, you are surprised that I'm a communist. Yes, I know that says it's joking, but still.
Das Vidanya, comrade.
Let's see. Would it be inappropriate to make an offering of something edible that you wouldn't otherwise eat or drink yourself due to dietary restrictions? I personally don't think so.
For heathen offerings, there's really nothing that speaks about that either. I mean, if you believe in your heart of hearts that a god is saying to you, this is an appropriate offering for me, so long as you're able to afford that offering, go for it. I don't see an issue with that either.
So Einar, apparently No Dancing Palm Trees wanted a spelling of that book title. Could you send it in the private chat so I can send it really quick in the regular chat?
100%, and I am hoping I can spell it right because off the top, it's gonna be weird. Okay.
All right, so let's see. You're very welcome, Dancing Palm Trees, for answering your YouTube question. What books would you suggest for a beginner to Hellenism? So if you're looking for praxis, there's only one book that I could recommend, and it still comes with caveats, and that would be the Laborious Hellenic Polytheism Household Worship Volume 1, which Volume 2 seems to be forever forthcoming. But in terms of like modern Hellenist praxis, that book has... The only issue that I have with it is that they do clip out some of the more seedy things from several of the rites that they draw things from, like the hymns and such that they draw their inspiration from for a lot of the prayers that they translate. And the fact that they hype up about things like several times they say you need to have the right attitude, but they never really discuss what it is. So there's an assumption that you're a member of the org and have already been educated on other things. But that would be the number one recommendation that I would have for Hellenic polytheism / Hellenism. Other 101 books that I could recommend in terms of like things that are easy to get a hold of. At that point, most of the rest would be things like scholarly resources. Some of them are a little harder to get a hold of than others. We have lost Einar. Hopefully he comes back. So the other one that I would recommend, a lot of people don't like Walter Burkhardt, but Walter Burkhardt's Greek Religion is a very accessible scholarly book that's fairly easy to get a hold of, and it's usually in print. Einar, you've got background echo.
How about now? Fixed?
The other one is Smoke... Yes, it's fixed. Smoke Signals for the Gods by F.S. Naden is one of the best treatises on sacrifice that I have ever seen. If you want to understand thoroughly the sort of attitude toward prayer and sacrifice generally, toward the act of ritual itself, that Smoke Signals for the Gods is one of my favorites. Most of the rest of the scholarly books I could recommend, unfortunately, come with a price tag and haven't been reprinted in a long time. One of them is Robert Parker's Miasma, because it's one of the most thorough treatments on that I've ever seen. And another one is Reading Greek Culture by Christian Servanu Inwood, which hasn't been reprinted in decades and is very hard to get. But like those are among the best books that I can recommend for kind of trying to get started. Unfortunately, as I said, Prayer and Greek Religion by Simone Polaine is another one, but they haven't reprinted that one in a long time. But those are the ones that I can think of off the top of my head that would probably be the best among just like easy to pick up, fairly inexpensive as far as scholarly books go. So since we got this question for Hellenism, what would you recommend for Heathenry, Einar? Because you guys have way more material that doesn't have, like, you have a lot of problematic authors, but there's also significantly more not problematic authors.
Oh, hands down. As far as starting books are concerned, a lot of heathens say that the Prose Edda is a great place to start as far as the base of our lore is concerned. I say save that for a little further down the line. Because a lot of heathens will turn around and say they absolutely detest the writings of Snorri Sturluson because of his Christian bias. But the unfortunate fact of the matter is, and a lot of heathens still have yet to accept this fact, unfortunately, the majority of what we have was written by Christians. Majority. And I would say your best bet would be to start with the Poetic Edda. My personal favorite translation would have to be starting with Jackson Crawford, because there are a lot of authors who do have their own iterations of the Poetic Edda that strive very hard to sound like the Poetic Edda is a Shakespearean play, when obviously it's not. And Jackson Crawford tends to make the language very simple, makes the language very palatable, and it's very easy to receive a lot more of.
Are there any publishers or books you'd like to warn people away from?
Oh, good question. Anything published by Hugin and Moonen Books?
Yeah, I was the one who helped you find that.
Okay, Hugin and Moonen Books. If you ever see on Amazon, if you're looking up books there, a book called The Study Havamal, stay away from it. Those books are not that entire publishing label. Their editor-in-chief has been a member of the AFA in good standing for 13 years. The owner,
at the minute that we could find.
Yes. And then I come to find out that the owner of that publishing label is Matthew Flavel himself, and Matthew Flavel is the Alsariar Gothi of the AFA.
But the editor-in-chief is, she's taken some of the biggest red flags down, but you can find older versions archived of the publishing website that explicitly talk about, like, whiteness and children, and yeah, it's not so great.
Yeah, no, the bloody hell it's not.
So as, Singham asks, when's my Hellenism 101 book coming out and my next novel? The answer is I don't know. I'm still working on the Hellenism 101 book. I have no idea how close to done it is. I can tell you that I'm over 20,000 words into it, which means that I'm a significant way into writing it. But the problem is redoing a lot of my older content has helped me dive deeper into it, which means that a lot of my understanding of these things has gotten complex enough that trying to distill it into beginner-friendly language while still keeping that depth is a challenge. So, excuse me. Embarrassing. This is what I get for drinking soda on air. Hooray! Press F to pay respects for my professionalism. So as far as like the Hellenism 101 book is coming, I'm hoping to get it out by next year. Not as in by the end of this year, but sometime next year. I'm hoping to get it out before the end of next year. That's not a promise that it will happen, but it is. I work on it on my days off. And I work on it as I work on my scripts and such. And as I'm redoing more and more of my older content, it's much, much easier to also do chapters of the book. As far as my novel goes, that thing is a beast that is lurking in the corners of my brain, waiting to pounce on me and just absolutely slaughter me in my sleep. So I have no idea when that thing's going to get done because it is a brutal mess, to be honest. It's a very, very long story that just is absolutely horrific levels of emotional torment for the author, namely me. So I'm not entirely sure when that's going to be done, but I have been picking at it over time.
See,
and the echo has come back.
Oh, hold on. Apologies for that. If I could see you write anything, because I had this in my head before I jumped into the stream, and I just figured I'd have to put this out there. I would want to see you write a wine-drunk rant on Platonism.
Oh my gods.
Because that would legitimately be the most spectacular literary ass-whooping any author has ever put to paper.
The problem with Platonism is that it's okay. So again, I don't hate Platonism as a concept. I dislike the way that a lot of Platonists like act. That's not all Platonists again, but the problem that I have with it is that I don't feel like some of it is useful as far as praxis and lycotis is concerned. It doesn't like I feel far more like a poet in my praxis. But like in Platonism is unfalsifiable, and that's one of the hard things. Is like one of the things that they tell you is that you cannot understand the nature of the gods. Like they're beyond nous, they're beyond the mind. They exist beyond the realm of mind. Mind is just a tiny portion of their emanation. Therefore, it could not contain and understand them. And so, like at that point, when you try to get into the nitty gritty of it, you end up with pages upon pages upon pages of endless words and descriptions that ultimately add up to something unknowable in the first place. So I kind of end up looking at what's the point?
Yeah, not for nothing. Now the way you've spun that to me, if you were to do that, I can honestly think that would turn into the Hellenic iteration of the Codex Gigas. And I'm like, yeah, that's not happening at all.
Well, and again, I'm not saying that Platonism can't be meaningful to some people. I'm saying personally that is how I feel about it for myself and my own practice, which is why I don't tend to cover Platonism as a whole very much, but I will talk about what Plato and Aristotle thought about things.
Right.
Because generally, if you see Plato very vehemently arguing against it, it probably means that other Greeks liked that thing most of the time.
Okay.
So he's a very good barometer for things that were common beliefs that, like, he wanted to change. Gaius also says avoid anything by Stephen Flowers in Heathenry, and Galina Kraskova is another one to avoid anything by Sanion in Hellenism. There are a few others. Like, if you're a member of my Discord server, there is a list of problematic Hellenist authors and spaces that I keep that talks about the reasons that they're problematic. So if you're interested in that, there is a collection there. That's not to say that you should blacklist 100% or that the content always is the problem, but sometimes it's more, do you really want to support somebody who did or said or has these affiliations?
Well said. I mean, the same can legitimately be said of Edred Thorson. I'm sticking with Edred Thorson because if you see books by Stephen Flowers, the name Stephen Flowers is Edred Thorson's birth name, and when he published under that name, he was outside of the AFA's printing label. So either way, both authors are a fantastic choice to avoid like the bloody plague.
I think I'm at the end of all of our questions so far. I am not seeing any more questions on my end. We have a video about Orphism and mystery cults when. I actually answered that question earlier in the stream. Apologies if I butcher your name. Thiago? So if you want to hear my statements on Orphism, I talked about them earlier. Have your experiences with the gods, both of you, changed who you are as a person and how you live? You know what? I can rant on that for a hot minute. I'm gonna let Einar take this one first because I will go off. I have talked about this repeatedly through my content. Absolutely, the answer is on my end. Like, and I'll get into the details on that in a moment.
I would have to say, hands down. I initially walked into this faith as a full-blown follower of Odin. And through my work with the gods, I realized that while I followed Odin, Odin was just a stepping stone to unlocking my spiritual path further. I initially venerated Odin, Tyr, and Air, wisdom, war, and healing. And though they walked with me for quite a while, and I started feeling in my own heart of hearts that my gods were going quiet. And that was sincerely one of the most depressing experiences of my life. And slowly but surely, I come to realize that Heimdall has been with me the same as long as Odin, and I never felt those signs. I never heard them. Hell came to me not too long ago, but her presence has always felt familiar to me. It's always felt welcome and comfortable. It sincerely felt like the minute I realized Hell was there, it was as though she was just an old friend. And Freyr, or Frey, whatever word you choose to pronounce him as, Frey was also has been with me for a long time too, and I never realized it. So understanding that these gods will look upon you with favor and will go quiet, I don't look at it as you were abandoned by your gods. You've turned around and opened yourself up to other ones. And again, like I've said, I sincerely don't know where I would be had it not been for heathenry. I'll be level with you. This faith saved my life. And I would love to give that back as best I possibly can. Because at the end of the day, I found this faith so damn enriching, this faith so absolutely rewarding that I'm training to become a priest in it. This is the path I walk. This is how I want to spend the rest of my life. And 8 years ago, I don't think I ever would have chosen to have made that decision.
And just a clarification, Thiago. I said that I had answered the question about like Orphism and whether or not I'll make a video on it earlier in the stream, and not that I had done a video on it. So as far as how the gods have changed my life, oh boy. Becoming a Hellenist generally, and my experiences with Athena and with the Mosai, and especially what I've called the Year of Mania, which happened well before I became a YouTuber, every aspect of how I see the world has changed through reciprocity with the gods, through studying this tradition, through learning, like Charis and reciprocity have become center to my worldview. There are so many ways, just subtle ways, in which internalizing a lot of cultural paradigms and like religious paradigms from Hellenism have changed every aspect of who I am. If you want to see a stunning example of that, actually, I've been told go back and watch some of my older content and see the way that I conduct myself and speak in some of those older videos versus some of the newer stuff that's from the start of this year. And you'll see the transformation that has taken place because of the way that the gods have consistently touched my life. Over the course of the past almost 6-7 years, nearly everything about how I see the world has changed, which is interesting because there were a lot of parallels between like one of the cultures I grew up in, because as you all know, I'm multicultural, and Hellenism, but I would say that the religious rites and the interaction with the gods, specifically like through ritual and offering and the things that I've been tasked to do over time, the pushing towards certain topics that I've gotten and things of that nature, hosting ritual for my community, the struggles and trials and tribulations that have happened as a result of that. Because as you all know, I was an author well before I ever became a YouTuber. I was well set on that career path and had no intention originally of becoming a content creator, and kind of got pushed into that more or less. And I would say that like I have become a much stronger, more steady, and generally more pious person, but also there are a lot of Hellenic virtues, Stoic virtues especially, that I have internalized significantly more as a result of exploring what the nature of piety is from a Hellenist lens. So like that, I would say that like there is not a part of my life that has not been touched by the gods in some way. And I think that part of getting quote unquote more advanced in your path is less about book learning and more about understanding the myriad of intricate and intimate ways in which the gods' domains overlap both with each other and your own life. There's a conversation between life and tradition that can only happen when you live it.
There's a quote from Anthony Bourdain that I've taken to heart and I've applied towards heathenry because it's the absolute truth. Bourdain had said in an episode of No Reservations, "Don't tell me what a man says, don't tell me what a man knows, instead tell me where he's traveled." The more I travel, the smaller I realize my place in the world is. And there's comfort in that. Because heathenry has taught me to broaden my mind, broaden my horizons. And I sincerely feel as though, while I feel that my place in this world is a truly small one, it excites me to find out how truly small I am in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I have felt kind of similarly. The more that I've understood, there's this interesting effect. People call it the Dunning-Kruger effect. It's generally it referenced as the people who know the least think they know the most. But the other side of it, I think, when we were talking about experience earlier, 25 plus years, etc., I don't think it's the years, but the act itself, as I said before. And I think part of the reason for that is that the more you begin to understand about a topic, the more you understand how little you actually know. Hellenism and ancient Greek history and ancient Greek culture and the myriad ways in which it's manifest are this incredibly intricate, beautiful diamond, like with so many different facets. And the way that the light interplays can make it look, when you first look at it, so incredibly difficult to see where all of those facets are and how they're cut and how they're carved and what that does to the stone underneath. But the deeper you get into it, the more trained your eye gets, and the more experience you have with gem cutting generally, which would be the practice side, the better you can understand the quality, beauty, and intricacy of this stone that you're looking at. And I would say that the more that I've practiced and lived the tradition, the more I've begun to understand about the myth and the lore and the culture and the way that they interplay with each other, about that beautiful sort of dance and conversation and song that is living that. And the gods, of course, have a place in that. Their interactions with us can teach us more than any myth or book or story or video ever would. You can watch my entire channel front to back, but it will not give you any level of understanding that can compare to when you stand before the altar and feel Eusebia in your bones the first time. When you feel the joy that shakes you to your very soul and connect with the gods and feel your accepted offering the first time. And every time again. There is no amount of discussion of the importance of votive offerings that will replace when you're down and out and at the bottom of the barrel and broken and sobbing, and you drag yourself before the altar and look at the votive offerings you gave in times of joy and thanks and remember that connection to the gods and feel the steel return to your spine.
In that experience for me, you just brought back arguably one of the best memories I've ever had while in ritual with myself. It was my very first ritual to Odin in my apartment. I had poured mead into my offering vessel, and I said that Odin was welcome in my home. I had said that he was always welcome in my home, and I had felt my left eye become so heavy that I was not able to open it. and I had felt as though there was a hand on my shoulder, and it was this knowing, powerful presence, and the only thing I could do was just joyfully weep as uh, getting me kind of choked up now.
But that's what I'm trying to say is, like, paganism, people call paganism, like, all branches of paganism, like, especially recon revivalist traditions, they call them the religions with homework. But the problem is homework quickly becomes a form of procrastination. And I hope that if there's anything that any of you have ever gotten from a single piece of my content, it's that religion is not written, it is not spoken, it is lived. Your tradition only lives through your blood, sweat, tears, bones, your offerings, your words, your actions.
100%.
The tradition lives through the people who practice it. Otherwise, it is just dead words on a page or words coming out of a speaker transmitted through electronic cables. The action is what makes a tradition alive.
Within heathenry, I have said repeatedly that the Viking Age specifically died at the Battle of Stafford Bridge with Harold Hardrada. The Pagan Age simply went to sleep. And a lot of us now have woken that age back up from its slumber. And honestly, I very much am of the belief that despite the fringe elements of my faith, that the world is better off for it.
So there was a question here from Gargoyle asking if I have a recommendation for a shop or site that I get incense from. The shop that I get my incense from is local, and they specifically get their incense from a local supplier. I don't think they have an online presence, so unfortunately, I can't give you a recommendation there. So HU with a 10-pound super chat says, ASD here, most I can give. I hope it helps a little. Thank you so much.
You are awesome.
Thank you all so very much for all of your kind donations. It really helps, like, make up for the fact that I took 2 weeks off. And like I said, I don't have a ton of expenses now because Akeda bought pretty much all the books that I had mentioned, even though he said he wanted one, and now everybody gets the secret patron benefit. God damn it, Akeda. But, like, I am supremely grateful, and for once, I'm not going to cuss him out on air for having been kind to me. It really does help because things have been financially tight on my end. We've had a number of medical bills and pet stuff. So I'm really, really grateful. I want to encourage everybody to remember, please don't donate if you don't have the money. Be responsible. Your life always comes first. If there's something you really want that will bring you joy, spend that money on yourself. But if you have a little bit to spare, I always appreciate the assistance. Like, I'm always shocked about how incredibly generous this community is. And to be honest, like, it really, really helps because damn near everything I make goes right back into my channel. If y'all saw my channel expenses, you would probably cry. So, Einar, do you have any parting thoughts? We're getting pretty close to when we start wrapping up streams. We're in like the last 15 minutes. If you've had a burning question that you've been holding on to until up until now, we've probably got time for maybe 3 or 4 more. So post your questions. And Einar, fix your like echo. It's bad.
Trying to. I'm unfortunately by a lake where I'm currently living, so it's touch and go. But to answer Gargoyle's question about incense, if you are craving an online presence, there is a shop called Orimnos Oddities, and I'm gonna.
You put your finger on your mic or something.
Can you hear me now?
Nope.
How about now?
Yes.
Okay. There is a shop called Orimnos Oddities, and I will have that put in the chat, that has custom blended incense, has some really great regular scented incense, and if you are a heathen, there are certain incense that are blended for specific gods, and I recommend this shop entirely. And yes,
press F to pay respects for Einar's fat thumbs. F is for fat thumbs, apparently.
Oh, no, disrespect the fat thumb. Disrespect the fat thumb.
Singham has a good point here. If you ever really want to know where all the money that this channel makes ever goes, just feel free to go to the description of one of my videos and look up how much those monographs that I cite in full APA format cost, and you will cry, and then you'll cry again, and then you'll wonder how the hell I managed to afford to keep this channel going. Most of my money goes right back into monographs so that I can do research. I work longer than full-time for less than minimum wage, and the majority of that money goes right back into doing research and getting this content out for you guys, because this channel is a labor of love, not a capitalist project. I would do a much better job at begging for money and monetizing things, and I don't mean clicking the monetization button that is required in the algorithm for videos to reach your audience, because YouTube suppresses anything that is not monetized in that way. I'm talking about like creating merch and stuff like that, which, you know, the only so-called merch that I've made are either handmade knitted items or like the calendar, which is less merch and more a useful ritual item. Rest well, Akeda, and have a wonderful time with your dad. You know, I hope that either he passes safely or that you get some more time with him.
All the best, my newfound friend. And not for nothing, I'm just going to flat out say this. I think we all need an Akeda. Akeda is an absolutely awesome human being. All the best, my friend, sincerely.
Yeah, Akeda is a longtime fan of this channel and used to be an anti-theist, and credits a lot of the work that I did with Jen Aldrich and Ocean before everything kind of ended on those fronts, like as helping to have pulled him out of anti-theism. And honestly, I'm incredibly proud of that work still, despite the fact that I may not necessarily still associate with all of those folks. Like, I'm very, very proud of the allyship work that I've done, and I still carry on that allyship mission with my work with Nervardia and with my interfaith allyship work with folks like you and Bayefeld and Rotworked and Kelidorius and others that are from different traditions and from different, like, approaches to their traditions. I still think that we're stronger together, and I will always believe that. Like, my patron is the patroness of wisdom and diplomacy. Of course I believe we're stronger together. It's literally written into her epithets, Athena Ksenia.
For the fellowship I run, outside of our words, honor, peace, wisdom, you inspired me for holding the one very simple truth that I believe all heathens need to accept. Viderum stercari saman. We are stronger together. And it's the absolute truth. And that is a hill I will gladly die on.
That doesn't mean you benefit from allyship with assholes. It means that for those of us who stand together for inclusivity, for diversity, for truth, for honesty, for openness, for basically the core virtues of the majority of our traditions, for reciprocity, for diversity, 100% we're stronger together.
Hands down.
Rosanna, I'm not sure if I would make altar merch like altar cloths and things, considering I personally think an altar cloth can be anything you think is beautiful that the gods agree. I just don't think that like, that sort of sacred stuff, I'm not sure that I'm a sacred artist to create those sorts of things specifically. If somebody wanted me to make an altar cloth for them, they would probably have to commission me to crochet them one that would be lacy or something along those lines. And I would have to ask Athena what sort of devotional activities I would need to do in order to fulfill that mission as a sacred artist. I know that there are certain rituals and things through antiquity and also for a lot of modern sacred artists that go into those sorts of things. And I wouldn't want to just pay some company to make those things as though you couldn't just get a tablecloth that is absolutely stunning and dedicated to the gods. You know what I mean? So I'm not really planning on making that sort of merch. If I ever do merch type things, most of it, there's a link to my Etsy store. I do handmade knitted items pretty regularly. I'm also going to be putting up the Kickstarter for the 2023 calendar sometime in the next month or so. Me and Artemophilos have been hard at work on it. But that's more of a devotional project, and nearly all of the profits from the previous one have gone into improving this one and paying them to make much prettier new artwork that I'm very excited to share with you all when that gets closer to the time. But like, if I do additional merch in the future, some of it might be art from the previous calendars that's no longer like going toward the current one. Some of it might just be things from the channel. But to be honest, I don't really know how interested I am in merch overall unless folks really, really want it and say riot in the server for it or something like that. Because monetization was never really the purpose of this channel. As I said, this channel is a devotional act. It's a labor of love. So if I do decide to do it, it's because people basically nagged me to do it until I was kind of forced to. And even then, I want to make sure that I pay an artist a very, very, very good sum for allowing me to use artwork for such things. Singham, by the way, you asked earlier if you could find Einar anywhere other than TikTok. I think he's got a Twitter account, but currently not a YouTube yet or anywhere else that I know of.
I am on Instagram, and thankfully I make myself incredibly easy to find. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Einar of Midgard.
Oh, gods. Apparently, we have people who want to riot in the server for merch. This is, again, another reminder that in the description, you can find links. If you want to try to help support the channel, there's no pressure to do so, but there's links to my Patreon and Ko-fi down there in the description. There's also the wish list if you'd like to see what I'm going to be working on in the future, because the channel wish list actually is a running list of monographs that I want to pick up for future videos and to explore future topics. And if you'd like to join the community, a link to the Discord is in the description. There's also a link to the subreddit r/common Hellenism, which is named after the book that I've been working on, and also the playlist of 101 videos that I have created. Though at some point, we might actually be adding a Hellenism 102 Beyond the Basics type list, because I'm starting to get into far more complex concepts. So for those of you who are not already a part of the community, that is, if you want to do a peaceful protest, I suppose, for merch, rather than a riot. The mods may not like a riot. The admin is currently hanging out here, the other head admin, and apparently he has said no rioting. So I guess peaceful protests and picketing for merch.
I can't see how a protest chant would go. It's like, hell no, we won't go. Give us merch now. I got nothing.
Gentle disgruntlement. Perhaps
Wow.
Gentle disgruntlement would be possible also. That is an appropriate attitude. All right, so Einar, do you have any parting thoughts from any of the discussions? We've had a wild ride. We went from some very like lighthearted topics where we were talking about Indian food for the first 15 minutes to like pouring our guts out about divine experiences and how praxis just changes the way you view everything. So I feel like we've been on quite the emotional journey.
The best piece of advice that I can give anyone, regardless of pantheon, I would say let it be this.
Oh God, Akeda.
Whoa. More gentle disgruntlement from Gaius. I like it. I would say very simple. Regardless of pantheon, regardless of what gods you feel are pulling you in what direction, question everything. Absorb everything. And always, always, always have a sense of humor.
I mean, I feel like I gave my best advice. I press praxis and charis as the #1 things in every video that I talk about on any topic ever. I will find some way to talk about reciprocity, because religion, like the best thing that I can say is that religion is lived, not studied. Religion lives through your blood and bones, through your actions. That doesn't mean offer your blood to the Theoi. Do not do that. If you take away a moral of the story other than charis is essential from this live stream, do not give your blood to the Theoi. Or anybody else's human blood either.
Yeah, no.
Just don't do that.
No. And if my camera would work, I would be gently tapping on the camera going, no, stop it.
Yeah, don't. Nope. If you're thinking it, just don't. Just don't press your luck. That is one place you do not want to find out. Just don't fuck around in the first place.
Exactly, because you're going to find out.
I mean, there may be other deities that are fine with that. If you're part of the living tradition where your deities are fine with that, the Theoi are just like, no, they do not want your human blood. Just do not, like, don't. Apart from that, though, like, my other best bit of advice is, as I said, religion is lived. All religion is lived. Even if you prefer to call it spirituality, spirituality is lived. Your living, breathing experiences with the gods will teach you more than you will ever learn on a tome. And in fact, I would even say that as I've gotten more advanced in my praxis, I feel like my studies contextualize lessons that I've already learned from experience more often than not. And that's not to say I go to a text looking for things to be confirmed. It's more, and anybody who's ever been around when I've had one of these aha moments will attest to this. I know for a fact Gaius can. There are a couple of others, including Singham, who have been there after an aha moment. There will be moments where I will start researching a topic, come across a line or phrase or a series of ideas, and then suddenly go, wait a minute, that's what that is? Because a lot of the time, you will experience things and then find out the ancients had a name for it. And it's one of the most beautiful feelings that you will ever have. But also, spirituality evolves and changes with the people who practice it. So when people accuse you of over-westernizing something, unless you're violating a major tenet like, agos, like, again, don't, like, an innovation that you would not want to do is offering human blood to the Theoi. But there are some things that just the arguments over, like, for example, offering soda when wine was as common as soda in ancient times. Yes, there's a sacredness to the vine, but also it was just the drink that everybody mixed with water and drank because it was safer to drink than water most of the time.
Right.
And so when you think about these things and you culturally contextualize them, your path is yours. It is your relationship with the gods. It is your charis. So, I mean, I guess if you want to fuck around and find out, do it. Experiment. Try things. Communicate with the gods. Learn a divination technique and define often. Offer often. Give your whole heart when you can, and whatever pieces of yourself that you can on the days that you have no spoons. Just that tiny sliver of connection can carry you through the worst of times. When you least want to come before the altar is often the time that you need to the most. Religion is lived. Relationships with the gods are experienced. Just like stalking a friend on Facebook isn't the same as actually getting to know them.
100%. I mean, at day's end, you could study until you're blue in the face, but you do have to eventually apply that study to actually see where it takes you.
So that is my best advice. Anybody beginning or intermediate or even advanced on your path, because the further along on your path you get, the more you realize the truth of those words.
100%.
So with that, thank you all so much for hanging out with me. Thank you all so much for your kind donations. Thank you all so much for your questions. I might do another live stream when a release would happen next week. It depends, and I may or may not bring a guest along with me then. Thank you so much, Einar, for coming and hanging out with me for a bit. You and I have been friends for a while, even though we haven't talked publicly all that much or collaborated, though when you start your YouTube channel, at some point I might do an actual proper interview with you to talk about one of the many topics that we've discussed.
Better believe it. I would absolutely love to come back into this with you. This has been absolutely real. I loved every second of it. So I'm glad you got me on here.
Thank you also, live chat, for not breaking the cardinal rule of do not bring up server drama or, well, general drama, like community drama. This has been a wonderful time, and I'm going to enjoy my 2 weeks of decompression and other creative outlets. I'm sure you guys will probably see, patrons actually just got to see lots and lots of pictures of all of my canning that I've been doing of the incredible numbers of tomatoes and, like, pickling cucumbers and other things that have just been, like, falling on my head from my garden. So it's been wonderful kind of getting to unwind a little bit, and your guys' support, both just showing up for the stream and like the questions that you ask and the donations you guys have given, all of it means so much to me. Please don't forget to hit the like if you're still here, and please don't forget to leave a comment as soon as the stream ends. Those comments can help boost it for folks who did, like, otherwise wouldn't see it. And until next time, remember, we're stronger together.